The bus groaned as it pulled through the heavy steel gates of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. A fine salt mist rolled in from the Pacific, clinging to the windows and fogging the view of the endless concrete and steel beyond. Inside, the recruits sat stiffly, each one fighting the mix of nerves and excitement that churned in their stomachs. The destination wasn't just another military base. It was the crucible of the United States Navy SEALs, the infamous training ground that either forged warriors or broke them. Among them sat a woman, quiet, unremarkable to the casual eye. Her duffel bag rested at her feet, her back straight against the seat, her gaze fixed out the window. Her name, for now, was just another one on the roster. A recruit, no different from the others. She didn't speak during the ride. She didn't joke nervously like the young men around her. She didn't need to. When the bus hissed to a stop, the recruits surged out, boots striking the pavement in a ragged rhythm. They craned their necks at the sight of instructors waiting for them, already in formation, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. The infamous frogmen of the Navy stone-faced, built like machines, their presence radiating discipline. She stepped off last, duffel slung casually over one shoulder. Her movements were smooth, economical, like someone who had carried more than her share of weight across battlefields. Still, to the others, she looked out of place. Some noticed the set of her jaw, the steadiness in her eyes, but most didn't bother looking beyond her appearance. They saw what they wanted to see, a woman among men in the world's harshest military training. The whispers started immediately. "Are they serious?" One recruit muttered under his breath. "Guess this is what happens when politics get involved," another sniggered. "She won't last a week," a third said more loudly, earning a few chuckles from the men around him. She heard them all. Her ears had learned long ago to filter noise from signal, but she didn't need to filter these. The comments were nothing new. She had heard worse years before, from enemies who tried to break her in interrogation, from allies who doubted her ability to carry her weight, from strangers who couldn't imagine a woman walking in the boots she wore. She ignored them, eyes locked ahead. The instructors wasted no time. Within minutes, recruits were ordered into formation, bags dumped, names shouted, and orders barked with venom. Push-ups, flutter kicks, bear crawls, no welcome speech, no easing in. Bud S., basic underwater demolition SEAL training, didn't wait for anyone to find their footing. It tore your footing away on day one and dared you to stand again. She dropped to the ground like the others, palms pressed into gritty concrete, and began pumping out push-ups with machine-like rhythm. Sweat broke across the foreheads of the men around her, but her face remained unreadable. She neither grimaced nor strained. To her, this was routine, not punishment. The instructors noticed, though they gave no sign. Their job was to break bodies and expose weakness, not to hand out compliments. But one instructor's gaze lingered an extra moment on her form, on the perfect alignment of her elbows and shoulders, on the steadiness of her breathing. Something about her didn't match the others. When the exercise ended, recruits stumbled to their feet, lungs heaving. She rose with quiet precision, grabbed her duffel, and fell back into formation as though nothing had happened. No theatrics, no bravado. Inside the barracks, the reality of communal living hit hard. The room smelled of sweat, detergent, and nervous energy. Bunks lined the walls, metal frames squeaking as recruits tossed their gear onto mattresses. Voices bounced off concrete walls, introductions, jokes, and the nervous chatter of men trying to size one another up. She found her assigned bunk and unpacked methodically. A few recruits glanced her way, their eyes darting quickly back when she noticed. But others didn't bother hiding their curiosity or disdain. "You lost, sweetheart?" one said with a grin, sitting on the bunk across from hers. His buddies chuckled, emboldened. She didn't answer. She neatly folded her uniforms, stacking them with precision. "Guess they'll let anyone in here now," another muttered. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. She knew these men. Not them personally, but the type, young, untested, their confidence still made of glass. They barked loudly because they hadn't yet been forced to bleed. They didn't understand leadership, not really. They thought it was about rank, or yelling, or proving themselves in front of each other. She had led men before real men, battle-forged warriors, who had stared down death and laughed in its face. She had dragged teammates through enemy fire, patched wounds with trembling hands, and sat through ramp ceremonies for brothers who never came home. She had nothing to prove to these recruits, so she stayed silent. When lights went out, the barracks grew restless. Some recruits whispered about the training to come. Others continued their quiet ridicule, laughing about how long the girl would last. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy anymore, not after years of combat. But she didn't mind. She listened. She always listened. Every cough, every whispered word, every nervous laugh, it told her something about who these men were. Who would quit when the surf got cold? Who would buckle under weight? Who would push through the breaking point? She wasn't here to make friends. She wasn't here to win approval. She was here to observe, to test, and eventually to lead. They didn't know it yet, but every move they made was already being measured. The recruits thought they were watching her. In truth, she was already watching them. And she was very, very good at it. The barracks always had a certain smell disinfectant, trying in vain to cover sweat, canvas, and the faint tang of ocean salt drifting in through vents. It was never home, not really, but it was the place where men would be broken down and, if they were lucky, reforged into something stronger. That night, however, the tension was thicker than usual. The woman unpacked her duffel with slow, practiced motions. Every shirt was folded into exact rectangles, every piece of gear placed with military precision. Not a wasted movement, not a moment of hesitation. To her, this was ritual small acts of order against a world that often thrived on chaos. To the recruits around her, though, it was a show. They watched her from the corners of their eyes, stealing glances as though staring openly might be too much. Some whispered. Others smirked. A few didn't bother lowering their voices at all. "Look at her," one muttered from the far side of the barracks. "She's not even sweating after today," another added. "Bet she's got a desk job waiting for her when this is over. She won't even make Hell Week," a third chuckled. That's when people like her ring out. The comments weren't new. She'd heard variations of them in almost every chapter of her career. Too small, too fragile, too emotional. She had learned to let the words pass by her like wind. Yet she registered every voice, memorizing who had spoken, filing it away for later. It wasn't anger that kept her alert, it was instinct. Leadership was never about reacting to insults. It was about understanding the people who would one day follow your orders. Every word they spoke in these early days revealed more than they realized. Insecurity, arrogance, fear. She said nothing. Her silence, however, only fueled their curiosity. One recruit, tall with a square jaw and too much bravado, finally broke the tension. He swaggered over, towel slung across his shoulder, voice pitched just loud enough for everyone else to hear. "So," he said, looking down at her as she laced up her boots, "what's your deal? You one of those diversity hires they keep talking about? Here to prove women can hack it?" His buddies snickered. She tied the final knot on her boot and looked up at him. Not with anger, not with defensiveness. Just a calm, steady gaze that met his without flinching. "I'm here for the same reason you are," she said evenly. "To see who can finish." Her tone was flat, not confrontational, but something in her eyes made him falter. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't defiance. It was worse. It was indifference. As if his opinion carried no weight at all. He opened his mouth, searching for a comeback, but none came. He gave a scoff that was more for show than conviction and turned back to his bunk. His friends laughed, but their eyes lingered longer on her now. They didn't like that she hadn't risen to the bait. They didn't like that she hadn't played her part in their game. Later, when the lights were dimmed and the room settled into uneasy silence, the whispers continued. Bet she can't swim the long course. No way she makes the drown-proofing test. She's not gonna last. She lay on her back, hands folded on her chest, listening. Every voice had a signature, every word a tell. She had done this before, not in barracks, but in villages where allies and enemies sat shoulder to shoulder, both smiling, both lying. Listening had kept her alive more than once. Now it gave her a map of the men around her. The loud ones, cocky, eager to boast, would either break early or burn bright for a while before crashing hard. The quiet ones, the ones who whispered with hesitation, had more potential. They knew fear, and fear, properly harnessed, could be turned into endurance. And then there were the watchers, the ones who said nothing, who studied her silently, just as she studied them. Those were the dangerous ones. They were either her future allies, or her sharpest skeptics. She turned her head slightly and saw one of them staring. He wasn't mocking. He wasn't laughing. He was just watching, his eyes calculating. When he realized she'd noticed, he looked away quickly, but not before she caught the flicker of respect, or perhaps curiosity, in his expression. She closed her eyes. Sleep would not come quickly, but she didn't mind. Nights were for gathering information. Days were for surviving the grind. The following morning, the recruits were jolted awake by the deafening clang of a metal trash can lid hitting the floor. Instructors stormed in, voices booming, demanding bodies on the deck in seconds. Chaos erupted. Boots hit the floor. Gear scattered. Men scrambled to line up. She was already standing by the time others were still pulling on pants, her bed neatly made, ears squared away. She had been awake long before the noise, listening for the inevitable moment of disruption. The instructors noticed. They said nothing, but she caught the flicker of surprise behind their sunglasses as they walked past. She didn't need their approval either, but she knew how the game was played. Instructors didn't care who you were. They cared if you broke. As they were marched out into the cold dawn air, she fell into formation with the others, her movements precise, her face unreadable. The men around her shifted, stealing more glances now than before. Some still smirked. Others looked away quickly when caught staring. The first glances had turned into first impressions. And first impressions, she knew, lasted a long time in places like this. They thought they understood her already, that she was weaker, that she didn't belong, that she was an experiment destined to fail. What they didn't know was that she had already lived through worse than anything this place could throw at her. They didn't know she had stared down death and walked away, again and again. And most of all, they didn't know the truth. She wasn't there to prove herself. She was there to command them. But for now, she kept her silence. The longer they underestimated her, the sweeter the reveal would be. The day had been long, brutal, and designed to crush even the strongest egos. By dusk, every muscle in the recruits' bodies burned. Their hands were raw from pull-ups. Their legs quivered from endless sprints across sand, so deep it swallowed boots with each step. Salt water stung their eyes, and blisters blossomed under their feet. But exhaustion wasn't the enemy. It was doubt. The instructors knew this well. They stripped recruits down physically, but it was the whisper in the mind, the thought of quitting, that determined who rang the bell. By the time the men filed into the barracks that night, they stank of sweat, salt, and effort. Steam soon rolled out of the shower room, filling the air with damp heat. One by one, the recruits stripped down and shuffled in, eager for the brief relief of hot water. She waited until the initial rush had passed. It was instinct, born of years in the field. Avoid crowds, avoid unnecessary attention. Still, there was no way to avoid the showers forever. Communal living left no privacy, and in a place like this, privacy was a luxury long surrendered. When she finally entered, towel in hand, the room quieted just for a moment before nervous laughter filled the void. Conversations had already been loud, young men boasting about how many pull-ups they'd managed, or mocking the way another nearly vomited during the run. But her presence gave them new material. "Well, look who decided to join us," one recruit said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Careful, boys," another called out. "Don't stare too hard. Might hurt her feelings." Laughter bounced off the tiled walls, sharp and ugly. She kept her eyes forward, her movements calm. She didn't quicken her steps, didn't shrink into herself, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She hung her towel, stepped under the water, and let the heat wash away the grime of the day. But silence didn't deter them. It encouraged them. "Man, I don't get it," one recruit muttered, loud enough for the room to hear. "Why waste a slot on someone like her? Plenty of guys would kill for this chance." "Yeah," another agreed, snickering. "But hey, at least we'll have someone to cook for us when this is over." That earned a chorus of laughter. She reached for the soap, expression unchanged. She'd heard worse. Much worse. But their words weren't just insults. They were weapons. Weapons born of insecurity, ignorance, and fear of being shown up. One recruit decided to push further. He strutted closer, smirking, his voice pitched higher to mimic her. "Yes, sir. I'll carry your rucksack for you, sir." The others roared. He flexed exaggeratedly, mocking her size, while his friends slapped the tile and doubled over in laughter. Still, she remained silent. She rinsed the soap from her hands, scrubbed the salt from her skin, and kept her focus inward. To respond now would be weakness. To lash out would confirm their doubts. One voice in the corner hesitated. "Come on, man. Knock it off," he muttered, quieter than the rest. But the louder ones drowned him out. "She won't last a week," someone said. "She won't last 3 days," another added. "She won't last through tomorrow," came the final blow, followed by howls of laughter. The sound echoed in the humid chamber, bouncing back until it seemed to fill every space. But as quickly as it had flared, it lost its momentum. Their laughter grew forced, less certain. Because she didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't show anger. She simply finished her shower, turned off the water, and wrapped herself in her towel with the same calm she had walked in with. And in that calm, something unsettled them. It wasn't defiance, it was control. Control that most of them didn't yet possess. Control that came only from years of discipline, of facing ridicule, danger, and death without breaking. When she left the showers, the room felt strangely quiet. The recruits resumed their chatter, but the edge was gone. Laughter was weaker, forced. A few avoided looking at each other. For reasons they couldn't explain, the fun had soured. Back in the barracks, she dressed quickly, her uniform crisp, her gear neatly stowed. She didn't speak a word to anyone. But inside, she noted each face, each voice, each moment. She knew who had mocked the loudest. She knew who had joined in for approval. She knew who had stayed quiet, and most importantly, she knew who had tried, however timidly, to stop it. That knowledge was power. Because one day soon, she would stand before them not as a peer, but as their commander. And when that day came, she would remember every word spoken in those showers. For now, though, she remained invisible, a shadow in plain sight. The recruits laughed at her, mocked her, dismissed her. But she welcomed their doubt, because underestimating her wasn't an insult, it was an advantage. The less they expected, the more powerful her reveal would be. And she knew this. When the moment finally arrived, when they realized who she truly was, those same men would choke on the memory of every cruel word they had spoken against her. Until then, she would wait, silent, patient, watching. The morning began with violence, as all mornings did. The clang of a trash can live against concrete, the barking of orders, the chaos of bodies stumbling half awake into formation. The instructors didn't want soldiers. They wanted survivors. Every dawn was a test to see who still belonged. By the time the recruits hit the sand, the sun was only a pale smear on the horizon. Wind howled off the Pacific, carrying the scent of salt and the promise of cold. They ran in formation, boots digging into sand that felt endless, packs bouncing on their shoulders. Men gasped, cursed, fell behind, then clawed forward again. She ran in silence. Her strides were steady, measured, her breathing controlled. The pack weighed heavy, but she bore it like she had borne far heavier burdens before, dead weight on her shoulders. Wounded brothers clinging to her arms, the weight of survival when the odds were stacked against her. Compared to that, this was nothing. The instructors saw it. They always saw, but they said nothing. They let the recruits stew in their own assumptions. After miles of running, they plunged into the surf, cold waves crashing over them like liquid knives. The Pacific didn't care about egos. It stripped the skin raw, sucked warmth from the bones, and whispered temptations of quitting. Just ring the bell, the water seemed to say. Go home. Be warm. Men shivered violently as they linked arms in the surf, teeth chattering, eyes squeezed shut. She locked her arms tight with the recruits on either side of her, her body steady against the pull of the tide. She didn't resist the water. She let it batter her, let it remind her of every freezing night she'd survived on deployment. The man on her left whispered curses between clenched teeth. The one on her right groaned. I can't do this. She tightened her grip on both, silently lending strength without words. They didn't realize she was holding them together, keeping the line steady against the waves. Finally, mercifully, the instructors called them out of the water. The group stumbled onto the sand, dripping and pale. They were ordered to roll until the beach swallowed them, until every inch of skin was coated in grit. Then more push-ups, more sprints, more yelling. By the time the sun was high, they were broken shells of themselves. But the day wasn't over. Not even close. That evening, after chow, the recruits gathered in the main hall. It was unusual. Normally, nights were reserved for cleaning gear, studying knots, or collapsing into bunks. The sudden call to assemble carried weight. The room buzzed with whispers. What's this about? Maybe they're cutting people already. No way. It's too early. Maybe we're finally getting our team assignments. She sat quietly among them, hands resting on her knees, expression neutral. She knew what was coming, though not the details. The instructors had been deliberate. They were setting the stage, and soon the curtain would rise. The lead instructor walked in, his presence silencing the room instantly. He was broad-shouldered, weathered by years of war, his voice as sharp as the crack of a rifle. Listen up, he barked. You've been here long enough to understand the basics. You've run, you've bled, you've frozen your asses off. Some of you think you're ready for more. Some of you are already thinking about quitting. Either way, none of you know a damn thing yet. He paced the front of the room, boots striking the floor like drum beats. Tomorrow, you'll meet your assigned SEAL commander, the officer who will shape you, break you, and if you're lucky, make you into something resembling a warrior. That commander will be your North Star, Their word will be law. The room straightened instinctively. Eyes lit with anticipation. The energy shifted suddenly. There was something tangible to focus on. The instructor stopped pacing and leaned forward, voice dropping lower. Until then, remember this. Respect is not optional. If you don't have it, you'll learn it. If you refuse to learn it, you'll be gone. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering for just a fraction of a second longer on her before moving on. None of the recruits noticed, but she did. It was the smallest of acknowledgments, a silent reminder that the game was nearly over. "Dismissed," he barked. The recruits erupted into chatter as they filed back toward the barracks. Theories flew like sparks. It's gotta be someone big. Maybe a commander from DevGru. No, probably some old-school Vietnam guy. A legend. Bet he's a monster. A real hard-ass. They spoke of their future commander in the abstract, building an image in their minds of some towering, scarred veteran with a gravelly voice and a chest full of medals. None considered the possibility that their commander was already in the room, sitting silently, listening to every word. Back in the barracks, the speculation continued. Some recruits even tried to one-up each other with stories of famous SEALs they'd read about. The younger ones wore nervous grins, masking their fear with bravado. And of course, the laughter returned. Can you imagine if it was her? One joked, pointing toward her bunk. The room erupted. Yeah, right, another said between chuckles. What, they're gonna put us under her command? Might as well send us home now. Hell, I'd ring the bell myself if that happened. Their laughter was loud, confident, unshaken. She said nothing. She simply cleaned her boots, polished the steel to a shine, and tucked them neatly beneath her bunk. Her silence unnerved some of them, though they wouldn't admit it. The night grew quiet eventually. One by one, the men drifted into restless sleep. Dreams of surf torture, of endless running, of the faceless commander they would meet tomorrow, haunted their minds. But she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, calm as ever. She didn't dream. She planned. She thought of the reveal to come, of the looks on their faces, of the silence that would follow. She thought of how respect would not come instantly, but it would come. Not because of who she was, but because of what she had done and what she was willing to do again. Tomorrow, the curtain would lift. Tomorrow, the mockery would end. Tomorrow, they would finally see her for what she truly was. And when that moment came, she would not gloat. She would not remind them of their cruelty. She would simply lead, because that was what commanders did. Morning came with its usual brutality. The clang of metal, the bark of instructors, the mad scramble of recruits dragging themselves from bunks into the chill air. But there was something different in the air that day. It wasn't just the cold seeping through the barracks. It was expectation. The instructor's words from the night before hung in the minds of every recruit. Tomorrow you meet your SEAL commander. Speculation had carried late into the night, bouncing between bunks like contraband. Some had imagined a hulking officer with scars like battle naps etched across his skin. Others pictured a legendary figure pulled straight from books and documentaries, someone whose very name carried weight. Now, as the recruits filed into the training hall, their chatter betrayed both nerves and excitement. Bet it's someone from DevGru. No, man, they wouldn't waste him on us rookies. Whoever it is, they're gonna tear us apart. She walked silently among them, blending in as she always had. Her uniform was plain, indistinguishable from theirs. Her boots struck the floor in the same rhythm. To the untrained eye, she was just another face in the sea of recruits. But inside, her calm was ironclad. She knew what was coming. She had prepared for this moment, not for herself, but for them. This wasn't about pride. It wasn't about proving her doubters wrong. It was about leadership, about showing these young men that strength wasn't always where they expected it to be. The hall buzzed with tension until it was cut clean by the sound of boots, heavy, deliberate, commanding. The lead instructor entered first, his face as hard as stone. He stood at the front, waiting until the last recruit had fallen silent. Then, with a single gesture, he called them all to attention. Eyes front. The room snapped to stillness. He let the silence drag for a long, punishing moment, the kind that stretched seconds into minutes, testing the patience of even the most disciplined. Then he spoke. Recruits, you are about to meet the officer who will lead you through the next phase of your training. This individual has bled, fought, and commanded in combat. This individual has walked through fire so you could stand here today. Respect isn't optional. It's owed. And if you don't give it, you will not last. A ripple ran through the room. Backs straightened, jaws clenched. Every eye fixed forward. The instructor's voice dropped lower, almost a growl. Commander front and center. Boots echoed against the concrete floor. The recruits expected a towering figure to emerge from behind the instructor. A man with a booming voice, a presence so heavy it bent the air. They craned their necks, waiting hearts pounding with anticipation. And then she stepped forward. The silence that followed was absolute. She no longer wore the plain uniform of a recruit. Now she stood in full dress, the sharp navy blue pressed to perfection. Ribbons lined her chest, their colors blazing against the dark fabric. And above them all gleamed the golden trident, the mark of a Navy SEAL, earned only by those who had endured the unendurable. The same woman they had mocked in the showers. The same woman they had dismissed in whispers and jokes. The same woman they thought beneath them. Now she stood revealed as their commander. Her boots clicked against the floor as she walked to the front. She didn't hurry. She didn't hesitate. She let the silence grow heavier with every step. The recruit's eyes widened, darting from her uniform to her face, trying to reconcile the image before them with the one they had mocked. One recruit swallowed hard, his throat dry. Another clenched his fists behind his back, face burning with shame. A third shifted on his feet, suddenly very interested in the floor. When she reached the podium, she stopped. Her gaze swept the room, slow and deliberate, locking eyes with each man in turn. She held their stares until they dropped, unable to withstand the quiet authority in her eyes. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, not raised, not forced. It didn't need to be. Gentlemen, she said, I am Commander Morgan. I will be your SEAL commander for the duration of this training. The words dropped like hammers. Some recruits looked stunned, as though their brains refused to process what they had just heard. Others looked ashamed, their own cruel words echoing back at them like ghosts. She let the silence linger. She wanted them to feel it, the weight of their assumptions, the sting of their arrogance. Not to humiliate them, but to teach them. I know what you've been saying, she continued. I know the jokes. I know the whispers. I've heard them all before, and I'll hear them again. But let me make one thing clear. Her tone sharpened, slicing through the air like a blade. I am not here for your approval. I am not here to convince you of my worth. I am here to train you, to lead you, and if necessary, to take you into combat. And if you can't accept that, the bell is right outside. You're free to ring it. The room was silent. No one moved. No one dared. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Thought so. She straightened, her presence filling the space not with volume, but with gravity. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to respect me today. But you will follow me. And by the time this is over, you will understand why. She stepped back, giving a crisp salute to the instructor, who returned it with the faintest trace of a smile, tugging at his lips. "Commander Morgan," he said loudly, turning back to the recruits. "Your unit awaits." She pivoted sharply, boots striking like gunfire, and walked off the stage. The recruits remained frozen in place, the weight of realization crashing down on them. Shame burned hot in their veins, mixing with awe. They had mocked her, underestimated her, laughed at her. And she had let them. Not out of weakness, not out of fear, but out of control. The first whispers rose, soft and uncertain. "She's our commander." Holy hell, she? She's a SEAL? But most said nothing. Most stared straight ahead, processing what had just happened. In the days to come, they would carry this memory like a stone in their chest. Some would grow from it. Some would resist it. But none of them would ever forget the morning they learned the truth. She had walked in as their equal. She stood revealed as their leader. And the lesson was only beginning. The recruits left the hall in silence. Not the usual silence of exhaustion, nor the half-hearted quiet of discipline. This was a silence born of shock, the kind that pressed against their lungs and stole the words from their throats. Outside, the sun glared off the sand, indifferent to the storm inside their heads. Boots crunched across gravel, gear shifted on backs, but still no one spoke. Commander Morgan had shattered their illusions. For weeks, they had convinced themselves she was weak, out of place, a burden in their ranks. Now, with a single step in full uniform, she had revealed herself as the very thing they idolized. A Navy SEAL, their SEAL commander. Some recruits walked with faces pale as chalk, their earlier bravado burned away. Others clenched their jaws, refusing to look at her as she passed among them. But she noticed everything. The ones who couldn't meet her eyes. The ones who looked at her now with awe, as if she had transformed into a different person entirely. And the ones fewer, but present, whose narrowed stares still brimmed with resentment. For them, the uniform changed nothing. In their minds, she didn't belong. Morgan understood. Respect wasn't earned in a single reveal. It was forged through action, hammered by trial, cooled in discipline. She didn't expect them to bend immediately. She only expected them to listen. And listen they would. That afternoon, the training intensified. The recruits were split into teams and thrown into obstacle courses designed to break both body and spirit. Walls too high to climb alone, trenches too wide to cross without help, ropes that demanded synchronization. Morgan watched from the sidelines at first, arms folded behind her back, her gaze sharp. She didn't shout like the instructors. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more weight now than 100 curses. When one group failed to coordinate, collapsing into a heap at the base of the wall, she finally stepped forward. "Again," she said simply. They scrambled to reset, shoulders burning, lungs ragged. They tried again, only to fail. Again, they hit the wall. Again, she repeated. Again. Her tone didn't change. Calm, steady, unyielding. Each attempt sharpened their frustration, their pride gnawing at the edges. They wanted to prove themselves to her, to each other, to themselves. On the fifth attempt, when the last man finally hauled himself over with the help of his team, she gave a single nod. Nothing more. But the recruits felt it. That nod carried more validation than any shout of praise. "Remember this," she said. "You either succeed together, or you fail alone." Her words hung in the air as they moved to the next challenge. And though no one dared to say it aloud, they all understood. She was testing more than their muscles. She was testing their unity. That night, the barracks were quieter than usual. Men lay in their bunks, staring at ceilings, turning the day over in their minds. Some whispered to each other, "She's tougher than I thought. No kidding. Did you see her face? Cold as stone. Yeah, but I still don't get it. A woman leading us? The whispers died quickly when she entered the room. She didn't storm in. She didn't demand silence. She simply walked the aisle, her eyes scanning bunks, her presence alone enough to hush the air. When she reached the center, she stopped. "Sleep well," she said. "Tomorrow, we start earning the right to call ourselves a team." Then she left, the echo of her boots lingering in the quiet. For several minutes after, no one spoke. The following days tested the recruits in ways they hadn't anticipated. Morgan pushed them harder, but not always in the ways they expected. Where the instructors had relied on brute force long runs, endless push-ups, punishing surf torture, Morgan introduced precision. Time drills where a single mistake from one man doomed the entire unit. Blindfolded exercises where trust in teammates was the only way forward. Tactical scenarios where leadership rotated, forcing even the cockiest recruits to taste responsibility. And through it all, she remained steady, never yelling, never losing composure. Her authority was quieter, colder, but it cut deeper. The recruits began to notice things. She never seemed tired. She never missed a detail. She never asked them to do something she hadn't already mastered herself. And slowly, painfully slowly, their silence began to shift. One morning, during a gear inspection, a recruit fumbled with a knot, his fingers clumsy with nerves. Before the instructor could bark, Morgan stepped in. "Watch," she knelt, her hands moving with precise, fluid speed. The knot snapped into place in seconds. Then she handed the rope back to him. "Now you." The recruit tried again, this time imitating her movements. When he succeeded, she gave the slightest nod. Not praise, not indulgence. Just acknowledgement. It meant more than a medal. But not all recruits bent so easily. One evening, after lights out, two men whispered in the corner bunks. "I don't care what she's done. This isn't right. Yeah, feels like some experiment. Like they're trying to prove a point. You said it. Commander or not, I'm not following her into combat." They didn't realize another recruit overheard. That recruit said nothing, but the next day, when Morgan assigned the group to carry a heavy log across the beach, those whispers echoed louder in the doubters' heads. The log was brutal, heavy enough to crush shoulders, awkward enough to require perfect rhythm. The team staggered, groaned, cursed under the weight. Sand sucked at their boots with every step. Halfway down the beach, one of the whisperers faltered, his grip slipping. The log tilted dangerously. The group strained, nearly dropping it. And then Morgan's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold the line." The faltering recruit gritted his teeth, surged forward, and lifted again. Not for himself. Not even for her. But because in that moment, failure meant letting everyone down. When they finally dropped the log at the finish line, gasping and trembling, Morgan looked over them. "Doubt me if you must," she said, her eyes drilling into theirs. "But don't doubt the man next to you. Out there, he's the only thing between you and the grave." The whisperer said nothing. But for the first time, they began to question themselves. By the end of the week, the silence among the recruits was no longer one of shock. It was one of focus. Words had given way to action. Pride had given way, at least partly, to discipline. And though many would never admit it, they had started to look at Commander Morgan differently. Not as a woman. Not as the subject of jokes. Not even as a curiosity. But as a leader. They weren't ready to say it aloud. Not yet, but the shift had begun. And Morgan knew that was enough. For now. The sun had barely begun its climb above the horizon when Commander Morgan assembled her team on the beach. The chill in the air cut through layers of uniform, and the surf crashed relentlessly against the sand. Every recruit's boots sank slightly with each step, leaving footprints that were quickly swallowed by the incoming tide. "Today," Morgan said, her voice calm but commanding, "we see who's ready to follow, and who's still carrying doubt in their hearts. If you fail today, you fail your team." The recruits exchanged nervous glances. Her tone carried no threat, but every word landed like a hammer. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Respect, she knew, was commanded through presence, action, and clarity. The task was deceptively simple. A timed run carrying heavy packs, scaled walls, and coordinated rope climbs. But the devil, as always, was in the execution. The recruits had to move as one, every step synchronized. One misstep would cost them time, energy, and cohesion. From the first step, chaos erupted. Boots slipped in sand, packs shifted, and the team staggered forward. Morgan walked alongside them, not shouting, not correcting at first. She let them struggle. She let them fight for balance, for rhythm, for survival in this controlled environment. Halfway through the course, a wall loomed before them. 12 feet of slick wood, designed to expose weakness. The team paused, hesitant, trying to gauge the easiest approach. "Do it together," Morgan said, simply. Her gaze swept across the group. Every recruit met her eyes for a moment. Some flinched under the intensity. Some steadied themselves. Some refused to believe that the quiet woman in front of them could demand their obedience, much less earn it. The first man attempted the climb alone. He scrambled, fell back, slammed into the sand. Pain flared in his hands and shoulders. Morgan didn't intervene. She waited, letting him struggle against his own pride. "Together," she said again. Finally, the team reorganized, linking arms, gripping wrists, and hoisting one another over the wall. Her hands joined theirs, not as a demonstration of superiority, but as a stabilizing anchor. Each member felt her strength alongside them, silent but unyielding, a steady force they couldn't ignore. Once over, the team pressed on to the next challenge. Rope climbs suspended over the crashing surf. Here, Morgan's leadership shone. She demonstrated once, fluidly ascending the slick ropes, landing softly on the platform above. Then she stepped back and waited. Some recruits faltered, hesitated, tried to pull themselves up without coordination. The rope swung wildly, hands tore against the fibers, and fatigue threatened to overwhelm them. Morgan's eyes swept the group. She stepped in only when necessary, her corrections sharp, precise, never punitive. "Lean together. Move together. Trust your partner," she said, voice low but slicing through the roar of the waves. And slowly, with gritted teeth and raw determination, they followed. Hands blistered. Muscles screamed. One recruit nearly fell into the water, but was saved by the quick reflexes of the man beside him. The team staggered to the platform, gasping, soaked, exhausted. Morgan nodded. No praise, no smile, just acknowledgement. The nod alone carried more weight than any words could. Next came the log carry, heavier than anything they had attempted before. Sand sucked at their boots, muscles trembled, and the wind seemed determined to throw them off balance. Halfway across the beach, a faltering recruit's grip slipped, and the log wobbled dangerously. Panic flashed across several faces. In that instant, Morgan's voice cut through like steel. "Hold the line. Move as one." The men gritted their teeth and surged forward. No one spoke. No one hesitated. Even the doubters found themselves caught in the momentum of teamwork, carried by the authority of their commander's presence. By the time they reached the finish, the recruits were exhausted to the point of collapse. Sand covered every inch of them, clothes soaked, limbs trembling. Morgan surveyed them with calm scrutiny. Not a word of comfort. Not a word of condemnation. Just a steady gaze that reminded them the work was never about comfort. It was about survival endurance, and trust. That evening, the recruits returned to the barracks in silence. No one whispered. No one joked. The pride and arrogance of the earlier weeks had evaporated under the relentless pressure of Morgan's command. Some couldn't sleep, muscles aching, minds racing with self-reproach. Others lay awake, pondering the quiet intensity of the woman who had led them through the day without raising her voice, without losing her composure, without asking for their respect. It was earned entirely through action. And then came the tactical exercise. A simulated combat scenario designed to push the recruits further than the previous physical challenges. They had to navigate a maze, neutralize hostiles, and extract a mock casualty. Each misstep could cost the team time and failure. Morgan divided them into squads, assigning positions without hesitation. Every man knew that she had considered their strengths, weaknesses, and even character quirks. The silent understanding that she saw more than they realized added to the tension. The exercise began. Screams of exertion and panic echoed in the mock combat zone. Some recruits froze under pressure. Others took bold, reckless actions that threatened the mission. Morgan observed, waited, intervened only when necessary. Her corrections were exact, surgical. She didn't scold. She didn't humiliate. She guided. And gradually, the team adapted. By the end of the exercise, success wasn't perfect. Mistakes had been made. Failures had happened. But the team had endured. They had functioned as a unit for the first time under her command. Morgan gathered them afterward. No smiles, no indulgence. Just words that cut through the fatigue like a scalpel. You survived today. That's good, she said. Not because it was easy. Not because you were strong individually. You survived because you learned to move as one, to trust each other, and to follow a leader you may not fully understand yet. That is what a SEAL unit does. Her eyes swept the group, lingering on each man. Some faces glistened with sweat and salt. Others were red with exertion. But all were changed. Tomorrow, she continued, we will do it again. Harder, faster, longer, and the day after that. If you think this is the hardest you'll face, you're wrong. But if you embrace the challenge, if you fight for each other, you will survive. And more than that, you will earn respect. Respect for yourself, respect for each other, and respect for your commander. She stepped back, letting her presence fill the room. The recruits were silent. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap. But the fire had started in their eyes. Pride, once misplaced, had begun to redirect itself. That night, as they lay in bunks, they replayed every moment of the day. Every wall climbed, every rope scaled, every ounce of effort remembered. And always, at the center of their thoughts, stood Morgan. Not yelling, not commanding with fear, simply present, simply unyielding, simply strong. By the end of the week, the shift was undeniable. Some of the recruits who had mocked her in the showers now sought her guidance quietly, learning from every movement, every command. Others still resisted, their pride wounded, but even they were forced to follow her lead for the team to function. Morgan had achieved what the instructors had only hoped for. She had transformed a collection of individuals into a unit. A fledgling unit, yes, but one that understood that survival depended on discipline, teamwork, and unwavering leadership. The hardest part of training wasn't the physical exertion, nor the endless drills. It was earning the trust of those who doubted you. And Morgan had begun to do just that. Morning broke on the beach with a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the previous week. The surf lapped gently at the sand, sun casting long shadows across footprints, still marked from yesterday's drills. For the recruits, the day began not with dread, but with anticipation, though few dared admit it. Something had shifted. Something had changed in their understanding of leadership, of strength, of respect. Commander Morgan stood at the edge of the surf, her gaze sweeping over the assembled team. Uniform crisp, trident gleaming against her chest. Her posture radiated the authority she had earned, not through fear, but through action, through example. The men, once mocking, hesitant, and full of doubts, now stood straighter, silent, absorbing her presence like a tide, pulling them in. "You've come a long way," she began, voice even calm. "But this isn't about distance covered or speed, or even who's strongest. This is about trust. Trust in each other. Trust in your team. Trust in the leader who guides you when the waves rise higher than your courage can see." The recruits shifted slightly, their eyes falling on one another, then back to her. Some swallowed hard. Others simply breathed in rhythm with her calm. No one spoke, but no one dared break the moment. "Last week," she continued, "many of you doubted me. Some of you mocked me. Some refused to believe I could lead you. That's natural. Doubt is human. Pride is human. And yes, even fear is human. But here's the lesson. Leadership isn't about your ego. Leadership isn't about who's loudest, strongest, or fastest. Leadership is about responsibility, about taking care of your team and demanding excellence, even when they or you can't see the end. The words hung in the salty air, heavier than the surf and wind combined. Every recruit knew she wasn't speaking abstractly. Every word carried the weight of experience, of trials survived, of lives protected. They had mocked her in showers, dismissed her as weak, doubted her skill. And now they understood that none of it had mattered. None of it had diminished her. And it had certainly not diminished them. "Today," she said, voice softening, "we're going to finish what we started. One last exercise. Nothing new. Everything you've learned up to now. You move as a team, or you fail together. No individual glory. No one left behind. And when this is done, you'll understand not just what it means to be a SEAL, but what it means to follow, to trust, and to lead." The team exchanged glances, a quiet nod among them. Something unspoken passed between their eyes. Weeks of grueling training, of humiliation, of doubt, everything had prepared them for this moment. And now, with Morgan at the helm, they were ready. The exercise was brutal. Obstacles combined. Walls to climb, ropes to swing, logs to carry. The surf rose higher than before, waves striking with a force that tested both balance and courage. Mist, grit, and sweat coated every face. Voices called out in coordination. Commands were repeated, corrected, synchronized. Every move depended on the man beside you. Every success born from teamwork. Every failure risked by hesitation. And in the center of it all, Morgan moved like a force of nature. She didn't shout. She didn't scold. She was everywhere at once, correcting, guiding, demonstrating, lending strength without taking it away. Every recruit knew she could perform every task herself, yet she chose to elevate them instead. By the end of the exercise, the team collapsed on the sand, exhausted beyond words. Every muscle ached, every breath was fire in the lungs, every body was coated with salt, sweat, and sand. And yet, no one dared look defeated. Not anymore. Not after what they had accomplished together. Morgan approached slowly, boots crunching on sand. She surveyed each face, expression unreadable. And then she spoke. "You've earned more than endurance today. You've earned trust. Not just in me, but in yourselves and in each other. That's the real test. The physical pain fades, the blisters heal, but trust that stays with you. It carries you through situations where failure isn't just discomfort, it's death. And now you've learned it." For the first time in weeks, the recruits looked at her without fear, without doubt, without hesitation. Some faces shone with awe, others with quiet pride, others still with disbelief. But all had recognized a truth. She had commanded respect not by intimidation, but by example. She had demonstrated in every moment what it meant to be a SEAL. A young recruit, the one who had been the loudest in mocking her in the showers, stepped forward. Head bowed, voice tight with emotion, he said, "Commander, we thank you for showing us the way, for not letting us fail." Morgan didn't smile. She didn't pat him on the shoulder. She simply nodded, the smallest gesture of acknowledgement, but it was enough. Respect was not given. It was earned, and in that moment, she recognized their beginning of understanding. "Good," she said, voice steady. "But this is only the beginning. Remember this lesson. It isn't about proving yourself to anyone else. It's about proving yourself to your team. And more than that, it's about leading by example, no matter who doubts you, mocks you, or underestimates you. Today, you know what it feels like to follow someone who's been through everything you're about to face. Tomorrow, you will lead in your own way. And if you remember this lesson, you will survive." Silence followed, deep and complete. The recruits stared at her, then at each other, the magnitude of her words settling into their bones. Something fundamental had shifted. Mockery had been replaced by humility. Doubt had been replaced by commitment. Fear had been tempered by discipline. As the sun climbed higher, Morgan finally spoke again, softly, "Dismissed. But remember, trust and respect aren't trophies. They're responsibilities. Carry them with you." The recruits moved out, slowly, thoughtfully. No one laughed. No one whispered cruelly. Some glanced at her with awe. Others still avoided her gaze, humbled by the realization of how wrong they had been. But all had learned the lesson they would never forget. Weeks later, when the recruits had passed the final tests, survived Hell Week, and walked out together as a unit, the story of the showers, the humiliation, the mockery, the disbelief was retold quietly among themselves. Not as gossip, not as shame, but as a reminder of the transformation they had undergone. The woman they had mocked, underestimated, and dismissed was now a symbol, not just of authority, but of endurance, of patience, of leadership, through action rather than words. She had earned their respect, not by demanding it, but by being undeniable in every task, every decision, every motion. Commander Morgan's presence remained with them long after the training ended. In future challenges, deployments, and trials, the lessons of that first week, the discipline, the teamwork, the quiet authority echoed. She had not just led them through physical tests, but through a transformation of mind and spirit. And in the end, they all knew the truth. Mockery had been replaced by admiration. Doubt had been replaced by trust. Fear had been replaced by respect. And all of it had started with one silent, unassuming woman who refused to bend to the expectations of others. She had been humiliated once in a shower by people who didn't know her. Moments later, they had learned they were in the presence of someone extraordinary, a SEAL commander, unwavering, unshakable, and undeniable. And that lesson, they realized, would stay with them for the rest of their lives.